Hey guys, welcome back. So this is part 2 of the guide for Mythic Plus for Discipline Priests. Now, at the end of the last video, I mentioned that I would show you the rotation for Boon before we hop onto into the next sections. So essentially with Boon, what you want to do, if it's like an AoE pack, you want to like spread, purge the Wicked on as many targets as possible. You can check out things here, use your Ruby, and then Boon, and then it's just this. Just blast, Nova, Nova, blast, Nova, Nova, blast, and you just do that on repeat. And you basically do respectable damage when it comes to AoE, and then you go back into Mind Searing. Now, there is an argument for using Schism, when it comes to tyrannical weeks. Some people try that. I'm not really sure if I'm sold on it just yet, but it is an option, so I thought I'd just leave it in there. What you do here is, once again, you purge the Wicked, your Ruby if you have it, and then your Boon, you blast, and then you Schism, and then you blast, and then you go back into your rotation. Essentially, you can fit one regular spell, so non-Boon spell, between your blasts, or 2 Novas between your blasts, and then you just go back to your regular rotation. So, alternatively, instead of Schism, you can do something like Radiance if you want to use the damage that you're doing onto the mob as atonement healing for the rest of your allies. And now we can actually go back to the video, so I hope you enjoy it. Cheers! Next, we are going to talk about talents. It's pretty straightforward for the first row. Twist of Fate is almost always the pick. Next, this is personal choice, but I personally like Angelic Feather because it gives me a nice speed boost that I use on the run, and I use this quite often because you do need to step out of things pretty quickly in Mythic Plus. In the next row, there is Solace. Solace is a very nice way for you to be regenerating mana, and it also does a decent amount of damage if you use it on cooldown. Some people have been running Mindbender, and I personally was running Mindbender back in Season 1 because I was able to pair it with my PvP trinket, which was on use and just gave me primary stat. But now I feel like there's a lot more value in getting Solace, and we already have a strong 1 to 2 minute cooldown in Boon of the Ascended where we don't have to pair it with Mindbender. So Solace is a nice amount of mana back, and you also don't lose your Shadow Fiend, which also does a lot of damage. Next is Shining Force, which is your little boop. This is very useful. Remember that it doesn't only boop targets away from you. If you target someone else when you're casting that, it will boop targets away from them instead. You can also use Dominant Mind, which allows you to use mind control on a target while also being able to control your own character. But that's in very niche situations. I very rarely take that. Like in some niche situations where I end up doing my dungeon per dungeon guide, I might mention some uses of Dominant Mind. Next, you'll most likely be using Sins of the Many because it's just a flat 12% damage increase, assuming you don't have Atonement up on targets. There is a table on the Discipline Priest Discord that shows you just how much your damage goes down when you have Atonement up on multiple targets, but overall, it's just a free damage increase. Shadow Covenant is a very nice idea to have. Like, it's not a bad talent by any means. The only problem with it is that it locks you out of Dispels, which is Blizzard's favorite way of giving healers something to do outside of making things do a lot of damage. So it's always dangerous to run Shadow Covenant because you're really locked into making sure that whatever pack you're going into will not have something that needs to be dispelled, or else your group will be wiped. Because not only does it lock you out of Dispels, it also locks you out of Power Word Radiance and any of your big cooldowns like Rapture or Pain Suppression or Barrier, which is a little bit of an issue, naturally. So overall, I understand why some people would look at Shadow Covenant and assume that this is a good way to boost our damage. Unfortunately, it does lock us out of a lot of our abilities to just like bail our team out in difficult situations, and also really dispels. We are not able to dispel. If Shadow Covenant did not lock us out of dispels, this would be an entirely different conversation. For the 45 line, it's Purge the Wicked. Purge the Wicked does a lot of our damage. It competes with Mind Seer with the highest damage by the end of a key. It can also be spread using Penance, which you will be using on cooldown, assuming it's not an AoE pack and you're not mind searing. And it transfers a lot of atonement healing because of how much damage it does. Each instance transfers to atonement healing. Finally, Lenience is realistically our only choice in Mythic Plus. Now let's talk about our secondaries. It's a lot more straightforward here than it is in Raid, where pretty much everything is equal. Haste is your best secondary by all means. Um, Next, you kind of want equal, not equal values, but you value versatility and critical strike the same way because they both maximize your damage, and versatility decreases the amount of damage taken while also increasing your damage done. So it's a very valuable stat to have. And then finally, mastery. Now, mastery only increases the amount of healing that you do, which, I mean, should be fine regardless. You're not really going to need to do more healing than what's necessary to keep your allies alive anyway. So, I most like mastery is not something you want for Mythic Plus. Now, if you have it, it's perfectly fine. Especially if having it means that you have a higher item level on your item, because higher item levels on things that are not your rings and your neck basically translates to more intellect, and intellect is your best stat by all means. So you don't want to sacrifice your intellect for any secondary. Um, you only want to listen to this list of haste first, then verse and crit at equal values, and mastery being last, only when all eye levels are being equal. When it comes to covenants, Kyrian is just by far the best disciplined priest covenant. It's Boon of the Ascended does so much of our damage that it's kind of difficult to justify going any other covenant. However, Venthyr is Mind Games is pretty good. Every 45 seconds, you have an ability that does a lot of damage and can heal your allies through atonement if they have it up. Now, some people do say that they like running Night Fae, which is really only kind of okay in very niche situations because you can decrease the cooldown of one ability of one of your DPS every 1.5 minutes, I believe it is. It's not that great. Really, it's Kyrian is the best, Venthyr is okay, and the other two are eh. Now, when it comes to legendaries, if you are Venthyr, then your only real option really is Twins, which is the double PI legendary. There is some argument for things like Kiss of Death, but really it was nerfed so much that it's no longer that useful. Some people like running with the Penitent one, which, I mean, looks cool, but there's RNG built into it, which is not something you want when you can just guarantee the value that comes from giving yourself and someone else haste at the same time. Now, if you're Kyrian, you would be running Sphere's Harmony, which is one of the best legendaries that we could have asked for when it comes to Mythic Plus, just because of how much damage Boon of the Ascended does and how easily you could bring it down from being a 3-minute to a 2-minute cooldown. When it comes to Soulbinds, Mechanicos, if you're Kyrian, is the way to go because we'll be able to unlock in a couple of days his last trait, which will allow us to decrease the cooldown of Boon of the Ascended from 2 minutes with spheres to 1 minute. Assuming it's an AoE pack, you need to hit at least 5 people when you cast Boon of the Ascended in order for it to go down to a 1 minute cooldown, assuming you're also using Sphere's Harmony. Lately, I've been skipping the extra potency conduit for Hammer of Genesis. I'm still playing around with this, but I really do like the instant haste that you get at the start. Now, for Venthyr, my understanding is Draven is really good for defensiveness because we're a pretty squishy class, and Stand Your Ground is what I used to run back in Season 1. I don't personally know much about Venthyr, but this seems to be the most commonly run one on sub creation. And this is what I'm just relaying to you guys. I have heard some people are running Theotar, but that doesn't exactly. The data is kind of not there to support that on sub creation when you look at the statistics. Now, for conduits, you want to be running your Covenant conduit for potency slots. So if you're Venthyr, you would be running Shadowed Perception, which causes your mind games to do more damage and reverse more damage and healing. And just remember that you will be using those pretty much all the time, or using that ability pretty much all the time or on cooldown in keys. Now, if you're Kyrian, you want to be using Courageous Ascension, which causes your Ascended Blast to do a lot of damage um, each time you cast Boon. And given how low the cooldown of Boon is going to be getting, you will be casting that a lot. By the end of a dungeon, if it's not like typically it's Mindseer / Purge the Wicked as like 1 to 2, and number 3 is Ascended Blast. With the reduced cooldown of Boon, that's probably going to be even higher. So Courageous Ascension is by far one of our strongest. It boosts one of our strongest damaging abilities. So it makes no sense not to take it. Next, there's Shining Radiance, which allows us to turn our Power Word Radiance into an AoE instant heal, which is something that we tend to lack. We can't like just instantly heal our allies, but by adding this, it actually does do quite a bit of healing. Now, if you are using a third potency conduit, then Rabbit Shadows would buff the damage of our Shadow Fiend, which is quite nice because, like I said, you want to be pretty aggressive with your cooldown usage. So when it comes to our utility, here are a bunch of spells that we can actually use. So you have Purify, which is our magic and disease dispel, and we also have Dispel Magic, which is our offensive purge. Both see a lot of uses in dungeons because you can dispel a lot of harmful effects, be it magic and or disease of your allies, or purge something off of the enemy. Just remember that if you have something like a mage in your group, which can spell steal some of the buffs on enemies, that you might not want to purge. Just double check with them if they're spell stealing something. Next, you have Mass Dispel, which is a great spell for removing magical buffs on enemies and debuffs from your allies. It can now be used to dispel bursting stacks as well, which is an affix off of your allies, which is pretty strong. Next, there's Psychic Scream, which is a great AoE disrupting spell. If interrupts are not available for some reason, or if your DPS players are being, like focusing too much on DPS and not actually doing mechanics, don't be afraid to use your fear as a way to stop certain dangerous casts. Don't worry too much about the mobs running away and pulling due to the fear, because it will likely break before they get too far, since the DPS will still be attacking them. So it can be used as a soft interrupt this way. To gain maximum benefit of this ability, I tend to try my best to stand in melee, which could take some getting used to, because if you're used to playing from range the whole time, suddenly you have to deal with this huge slur of melee mechanics as well. But I mean, it doesn't hurt to learn what they are. Next, there's Fade. I pop this ability quite often on pull, or if I'm worried that standing next to a pack will aggro them. The reason I use it on pull is because what Fade does is it causes you to cause 0 threat while it's active, which means that as your tank is running around pulling everything, as long as they are targeting him and you have Fade applied to you, you can freely cast your Purge the Wicked as the tank is pulling more or still setting up to build threat. When you're up against humanoids or dragonkin, you can also pair that with Mind Soothe to get something that's almost like a pseudo stealth. So if you Mind Soothe a humanoid and you just Fade, you can pretty much walk right next to them and they won't aggro. Finally, when you pair Fade with the Endurance Conduit, it can actually serve as an instant personal 10% damage, almost 10% damage reduction, which is pretty nice for a 45-second cooldown. Or is it 30 seconds? Next, there is Desperate Prayer, which is our personal. It's only in a 1.5 minute cooldown, so really whenever you're in trouble, just go ahead and pop your Desperate Prayer. It increases the amount of health that you have, plus with a conduit, it can also heal you for some damage. It's not the best personal in the game, but I mean, it's a personal. If it makes you a little bit tankier, then why not use it? So don't ever save that. Just use it whenever you feel like you're being hit by something and you're slightly in danger. Next is Shining Force, which is your boop. It can be used to interrupt casts. It can help your tank kite. You can boop things out of Sanguine. There are so many nice uses for this. Mind Control is another one of your spells that you can use, which has some niche uses. And next there's Leap of Faith, which is also called Life Grip. This is one of my favorite abilities as a priest. I've used it to save multiple lives and keys where your teammates can get booped off of the map somehow. Like there's the Death Winds from Theater of Pain, or the Gorms from Mists of Tirna Scythe. You just prepare yourself for the fact that they are probably going to get booped or hit by something, and you can just yoink them straight out of the air. It can also help the tank if they're having issues kiting when they have high necrotic stacks. Something like a bear does not, or a blood death knight does not have nearly as much mobility as a demon hunter, so they can't just jump away. So they might call for a grip, or you might just grip them if their necrotic stacks are getting too high. Another use is, you can also just troll your teammates with this. But I would advise against that because they might end up using the I don't know, that item that prevents them from being impacted by Leap of Faith. So just use it to save them. Don't troll too much. Lastly, there's Shackle Undead. It can be used as a CC or as a CC or an interrupt for undead mobs. It is broken on damage, but you can spam it if that's needed. One example that I remember using this quite a lot is during Inspired Weeks in Theater of Pain. It also prevents the Frostbolt Volley from Necrotic Quake from getting off from the Necromancer pack. If for some reason the CC keeps breaking, you can just keep spamming Shackle Undead in order to prevent them from getting off their Frostbolt Volley, which is pretty nice. It saves you a lot of damage because nothing really, like the crossbowmen do some damage, but you can weave Shackle and Shackle between your healing casts. Next, let's talk affixes. Inspiring really is mostly a tank affix, but you can help with Shackle, Shining Force, Fear, Mind Control, all the utility spells that we have. Bolstering / Raging, not really much you can do about that. Next, there's Sanguine. You can help by booping things with Shining Force. And then there's Bursting. Bursting is actually one of the best tweaks for priests in general, because we do tend to be the best healers for this affix, because one of the things that Bursting does is it limits people from being able to do big pulls. Assuming your DPS are able to kill things at the same time, and you're going to have like high stacks of Bursting, you can just be prepared with a Mass Dispel, and you instantly get rid of the Bursting, and it's like nothing even happened, and you're good to go to the next pack, which is not something that lots of healers can do, or any really other healer can do without popping a huge cooldown. Spiteful, I like to play from range during this affix. I use things like Psychic Scream and Shining Force to get them away from me. But I always make sure that they're not going to be booped into something that will end up pulling and messing up a route. Necrotic, once again, is mostly a tank affix. Just remember that it does prevent things from like Rapture from doing any like decent shielding. However, damage reduction cooldowns are pretty helpful here. So while you might not be able to heal them, they still benefit from things like pain. Like tanks can still benefit from things like damage from damage reduction. So pain suppression really like it helps out quite a bit, and so does barrier. And I guess you can grip your tank during necrotic weeks in order to make sure that they don't get meleeed again. And you can boop the targets off of them as well to give them some breathing room for the stacks to reset. Next is Storming. If you're playing in melee, then try not to get hit by them. It's not as punishing as it was now that they are nerfed. Volcanic is honestly a non-affix, just sidestep it and you'll be fine. Explosive are actually pretty easy to kill. You just need one Purge the Wicked to clear the explosive. Just be aware that you likely won't be able to do that much damage that week because you will be focusing mostly on Purge the Wickeding the explosives. It's your job to handle them. If not, then the DPS can and should help. Quaking is one of the easiest affixes to deal with. Remember that if you got locked out of one school of magic, we still have another school of magic to lean on. So you might not be able to cast your holy spells, but you still have your shadow spells. Same thing goes for if you get locked out of your shadow spells. It's not as punishing for us as for other specs, however, it can throw you off your rotation. And then, finally, there is Grievous. Disciplined priests are not as bad as they used to be when it comes to dealing with Grievous. Things like each bolt of penance can remove one of the stacks. So if a person has 4 stacks, you can penance them and then they're down to 1 stack. Applying things like Purge the Wicked or healing through the target with Shadow Mend also can remove a stack. Now, unfortunately, Power Word Radiance and Atonement Healing do not remove stacks. When it's Grievous, you really want to prioritize healing over anything because you want to keep your party topped off. And you have to be very aggressive with your defensive cooldown as to not fall behind. So remember, Rapture gives people more health, essentially, an extra bar of health. So you want to be using Rapture quite a bit because you'd much rather use Rapture on your allies to prevent them from even getting Grievous than to heal Grievous. I have not switched to any other spec just because of Grievous weeks. I've still been able to push really decently high keys even with Grievous. So don't worry too much about it. Just make sure that you're prioritizing healing that week over damage, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now, I will be making a separate video about the seasonal affix, where I talk about Tormented, and how to deal with it, and which powers I pick on different lieutenants, and I'll also be talking a little bit about the shards. In the future, I am contemplating making an individual video for each one of the dungeons, just as a little bit of this is what you can do here, this is what I personally do here, this is my thinking process here. I've also been thinking of uploading full keys, but if you guys have any recommendations for what you would like to see, please feel free to leave them down in the comments. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much. I hope you benefited from this guide. Feel free to like, comment, and if you have any questions, subscribe, and DM me on Discord if you have any other questions or if you want something more tailored for you. There's also my own Discord in the description. Feel free to join. And once again, the Warcraft Priest Discord is an amazing resource for anyone to have. Icy Veins is also a great place to go if you have any questions. So is the Warcraft Priest website. Once again, thank you and happy keying. Cheers.